All right, today in this video, we're going to be talking about RV solar and running your AC off of your solar. We're planning on doing a lot of boondocking in national parks and harvest coasts, which is staying in vineyards and breweries and farms and other unique places. So we'll be using our solar a lot, and we'll keep you updated on changes we make and how it's working. But let's head over to Dad and get started. I'll also put Dad's solar shopping list in the description below.
I started looking on the internet to try to find a way where we could power our motorhome with solar. And I want to tell you, you can do it, but I'm going to tell you how to do it. I had to do the research and figure it out myself. And it's expensive. And what you're really buying is you're buying freedom. So hopefully you can use this and design your own system. So over here I have a cost breakdown of what I've spent. Now I went with Rely-On lithium batteries. Each one of these batteries is 300 amp hours. It's $3,200 on sale. I bought two to begin with, and I liked them so much I bought a third one. And so we're looking at $9,600 for the batteries. And they're about 81 pounds each. But surprisingly, these heavy, dead lead acid batteries that we took out, it's about the same weight with a whole lot more power. These are going to be 12 volt batteries. They actually usually stay around 13.5 to 14 volts, but they're called 12 volt. These lithium batteries are great. The solar controller is called a 150-100, but what this means is you can put 150 volts into it and get the most 100 amps out of it. And so we'll talk about that when I go over the diagram. Then I bought some solar panels. Solar panels have been coming down in price a lot lately. They were $90 a piece when I bought them. Now they're maybe $75. To start with, I got 15, and it was $13.50. Got them on Amazon. And then I got a DC-DC converter. It was about $300. We'll be talking about that when I go over the diagram why you need that. So the miscellaneous part is me buying, some of this includes tools that I didn't have. I needed to make wires for the batteries, for the solar panels, and and also I needed a gauge to see how much we have left in our batteries. And all said and done, so far we're about $14,035, but when we're done it's going to be about $15,000. But let me tell you what happened. So a couple days ago, with our system, I started the air conditioner at 8:40 in the morning. Hot summer Texas day, 100 degrees plus outside. Now, I have two air conditioners on the motorhome, but I can only run one with this. It ran for 7 hours, and I used less than 50% of the battery. And so it was manageable inside. It was nice and cool, and it was all running off of our lithium solar combination. It run down 50%, and I'm in the process of fixing that to where it can be self-sustaining. I think I have enough space on the motorhome to make that happen. So I want to go over a few principles before we get started, and here are the principles. And because I'm not an electrical engineer, I just like doing things myself. I don't, the $15,000 is just the materials. It doesn't cover the labor. And that would be a lot more expensive if you're not doing it yourself. Just the principles are, I don't understand how electricity works all that much, but I can understand how water works. And so I'm going to be putting things in terms of water. And volts, I want you to think of that as how big the pipe is. And if it's a less voltage, it's a smaller pipe, more voltage, bigger pipe. Okay, amps is how fast it flows, otherwise known as current. Watts is like how much water you're putting in there. So you could have high amps, low volts, and get the same number of watts as low amps and high volts. So the benefit you get here is when you go with low amps, you can use a smaller wire. If you have high amps on a small wire, you're looking at a possible fire. And so I wanted to go with high volts and up at the solar panels. Not too high because I didn't want to get shocked too bad, but I wanted to go with a small wire because we came with a small wire. You lose less voltage when you're over distance if you go with a larger wire. So volts, amps, and watts. And then parallel and series. when you're hooking something up in parallel, you're hooking the plus to the plus and the minus to the minus. And when you do that, you're adding the amps. The volts stay the same. And in series, you're doing plus to minus, and amps stay the same, but you're adding volts. So if you have two 12-volt batteries and you're adding in series, there's 24 volts, but it's the same number of amps. And 6 is fuses. We're going to be putting a lot of fuses in here where it's necessary, but you want the fuses to be about 1.2 times the highest number of amps that you expect to see. And you want fuses to protect yourself from your own mistakes. You end up having a problem, a short or something like that. You don't want to cause a fire. You just want to blow a fuse. And then this term, amp hours, that's what we're going to be looking at on our fuel gauge to see how much we've used, how much more time we have left. And so I mentioned amp hours earlier in the batteries. These are 900 amp hour batteries. Most of these batteries can put out is 100 amps at a time. If you have more than one, you can multiply by 0.75 and get more amps out of it. So I could conceivably get 225 amps out of my 3 sets of batteries hooked in parallel. What I want to talk about is our design. And part of this came with the motorhome. We already had an inverter in the motorhome. It's a 2,000 watt inverter. It actually can put out 2,800 watts. And it was already there. The starting battery, we had the alternator. But what we've added, these are my 3 Rely-On batteries. They're 300 amp hours apiece for a total of 900 amp hours. And these batteries are hooked in parallel, plus to plus, minus to minus. Now on the minus side, it's hooked up to something called a shunt. Now the shunt measures the amount of current that goes on your bus bar. Now the bus bar is the center of activity. So everything goes to the bus bar or from the bus bar. But the combination of these batteries, all the current is recorded here. Now you need to set it to 100%, and you need to put in that we have 900 amp hours, but it will tell you what percentage you have left. In order to run our refrigerator, it uses 3 amps. So I have plenty of power to run our residential refrigerator. You know, we don't have propane on it, so the only thing it can run off is 120 AC. This is all recorded in the shunt. It lets me know what we have left. Okay, those 2 go to the bus bar right here. We'll talk about the DC-DC converter in a minute. But next I have a solar controller, and it's a Victron. It's really nice, it has Bluetooth, and I can get on my phone and I can see what the kind of current the solar panels are producing. I can see how much current's going to the battery. Remember, the current, the amps coming from the solar panels isn't the same as the amps going to the battery. This 150, 100 means is you can have your input can be 150 volts. And the other part of it, the 100, is 100 amps. That's the most amps we'll put out. So you can put whatever voltage amps you want into this solar controller as long as it's under 150 volts, and it will output the power that you need to go in your bus bar for a 12-volt battery. So it doesn't matter what it is. So you get to decide. Let me tell you what I decided. I decided that we would go with sets of 5 solar panels each. And so each one of my solar panels is 100 watts. I went with the heavier, sturdier, aluminum-based solar panels. I read that the flexible ones, although I like the flexible ones for the weight, they delaminate and they don't last maybe only a year or 2 from what I could tell. And so each one of these panels are 100 watts. They weigh about 15 pounds each. I've hooked them up in series. So remember we talked about series, plus to minus, plus to minus, plus to minus. So you end up with a negative up here and a positive down here. When you're in series, you're adding volts, and each one of these is 20 volts. So 20 plus 20 plus 20 plus 20, 20. That's 100 volts, putting it into the solar controller, and each one of them is 5 amps. Series, you're adding volts, but the amps stay the same. Now this is the set that we haven't put on yet. We're expanding into it. I didn't really know what we needed when we started. We started off with 2 lithium batteries, and I thought these are so good, 3 would be better. Same thing with the solar panels. We started off with 10, and then we went to 15. We're not going beyond 20 because I don't have any more space on the RV. So we're going to be with 20 of these solar panels. Now each one of them being 100 volts, 5 amps each. Now each one of these sets we're going to add in parallel. So we're going to stick with our 100 volts, but we're going to be starting to add amps in parallel. So we got 5, 10, 15, and 20 amps. That's 20 amps at 100 volts. Currently, I have a total of 1,500 watts. That's what I've been running on. In order for it to be a self-sustaining thing where I'm not even draining my battery, I expect to have 20 solar panels on the roof. And I'm not angling the solar panels. You can do better if you build them so you can angle them. I'm just going with a lot of solar panels and they're all flat. That's what we're going with, 20 solar panels. And they all go into the controller, 100 volts, 20 amps, and it's going to come out 75 amps or so, and it's going to be at 12 or 13 volts, something like that. And we're going to put that on the bus bar. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is the solar is great. When you're sitting still and you can charge up those lithium batteries, either it'll charge at between 60 and 70 amps. Now that's at 60 and 70 amps at 12 volt, which is not over here. But anyway, talking about the DC-DC converter. At first I didn't think I needed it because what this is doing, the solar panels is probably enough to recharge those batteries. But this is free. We're planning on going to Alaska, driving a lot, and so taking power off of your alternator isn't a bad idea. This DC-DC converter is a lot cheaper than doing these solar panels. And while you're driving, what you can do is you can be charging up your lithium batteries. Now, that's the way our old system worked with the lead acid batteries. The alternator charged up the batteries. But what I've read with the lithium batteries is the lithium batteries will take all the charge you can give it and then some. And so your poor little alternator will be working harder than it should and overheating just to supply power to your lithium batteries. And I didn't want to replace my alternator in the motorhome. And so what I did is I went and bought this DC-DC converter. And before I had this converter, I was putting so much power into these batteries that it was coming out at like 100 amps, sucking everything out of this alternator. My alternator is 175 amps, but everything was going off to these batteries. And what you want to do is you want to limit that. And so this DC-DC converter is going to limit it. And these come in 20 amp, 40 amp, and 60 amp. 60 amp, not many people have that. It's the biggest one, but I wanted to go big. And since I have so many batteries, I thought, okay, I can take 60 amps off the alternator. And I'm not taking it directly off the alternator, I'm taking it off the starting battery. I'm putting it, I have a switch here. And I can choose when to use this and when not to use it. If our batteries are full, I'm not going to use this alternator power. But if our batteries are low and there's no sun, we're driving somewhere, I can flip the switch and I can use our alternator to charge our batteries and they'll be full. Everything goes to the bus bar until you get to the inverter. And the inverter is taking off the bus bar to convert it DC current to 110 AC current. Say I have 10 amps at 12 volt. If I'm at 120 volt, that's really 10 amps because watts equals volts times amps. What I want to do is I want to produce a lot of 120 volt power. What I have is I want to run everything I can. My air conditioner. And I got lucky. For the air conditioner, we get a duotherm power saver. And so I put one of those soft start things on there so where you didn't have a big power spike when you turn the compressor on. I put a meter on it and it consumes about 11 amps, which is pretty low as far as RV air conditioners go. And then my refrigerator, it takes about 3 amps. And then lights and everything else, it's going to take about 3 amps. So right now, 14, 17, about 17 amps. I'm running everything. It's not quite staying even. I am draining the batteries a little bit, but it's going to be pretty much even when I add those other solar panels in. The principle is that The watts are the same. The amount of water you have in your bucket is the same. Whether you have high amps, low volts, or low volts, high amps, because what it is current times volts equals watts. So in this case, we have current is 100 amps times a low voltage, 12, is the same as 10 amps times 120 volts. It's the same number of watts. On our solar panel, I'm up there at high volts and low amps, so I can use a small wire to come down to my battery area. After my controller, I want to be at low volts and high amps. And then I'm going to have to go with thick wire, like 1-aught wire, so I don't heat up the wire and lose current. So let's go out to the motorhome and we can look at what I showed you in real life. So we'll start with the first battery. And the first battery's in here. It's under the stairs. That's where Bounder puts them. That's a Rely-On battery. It's a 300 amp hour battery. And I'm using 1-aught wires. I made these lugs myself and put on shrink wrap. The bus bars that are referred to, there's the red one is the positive bus bar, and I have everything going to that. It's a negative bus bar. You notice this thing, this brass item right there, that's the shunt that I mentioned, and that helps this gauge. Notice the 2 pipes I have in there. All my wiring goes through the pipes. I like to protect them. Use this coil stuff you can get at the auto parts to protect your wire. Well, I don't need 1-aught for all of my wiring, only for the high amperage wiring. And things that are low amperage, I can use like 10 gauge. This is our number 2 battery, is original, and then we liked them so much that we bought a 3rd battery, and we just recently put this one in. This is my inverter, and this was all here before, and everything down here is new. And if you look in there, the pipes, that's where it's coming through under the stairs. This is my DC power charger. It's a 60 amp, and I have that on a switch because I don't want to use that all the time. This is my switch to turn off the solar panels up on the roof. And then I have 2 fuses. I have a 30 amp fuse because I'm not going to get above 30 amp. And then I have a 120 amp fuse because it should be like 20% more than this thing can output. Now this is my 150 volt, 100 amp solar controller. Now I'm never going to get above 150 volts. I'm at right 100 volts max. And I might get to 100 amps. I think this is all I need. I recommend putting a lot of fuses in because it's a lot cheaper than burning something out. Okay, we're up on top of the motorhome and looking down on our 100-watt solar panels. And I was trying to minimize the number of holes we drilled in our roof. I don't want it to leak, but in retrospect, it didn't make much of a difference because the roof is a thinly coated sheet metal, and you drill through it, and it's difficult to put things on the roof. So we started off using electrical panel. You can see it has a bunch of holes in it, and we tighten these down to hold these down, and it works pretty good. It's very solid. It's not going to come off. I didn't want it to blow, any of these to blow off the roof when we're driving and injure someone, so I made them very solid. Made sure on the ends that the wind wouldn't lift it up or something get caught under it. Our second time, we ended up going to Home Depot, and I got some aluminum L bracket, and I took my saw and I just cut a bunch of little pieces off, and I bolted these on. I know that you can buy on Amazon mounting kits. I just didn't trust them. They look so wimpy, and they didn't look like they would hold on to our roof going 70 miles an hour with a stiff wind coming against us. And I didn't want them blowing off, so this might be overkill, but I think the aluminum L brackets from Home Depot are going to be worth the money. And if you look, we have a little bit of extra space here, and then that's going to be it for our solar panels when we get the next 5 on. I use some protection for UV, protect our wires up here, You can get this at any auto parts store. That's how I go into the coach. Right here, we're right above the refrigerator. We pulled the refrigerator out and went straight through behind the refrigerator to our battery container. It's a very cloudy day. We're bringing in about 600 watts. Max is 1500 watts, so we're about half. And our voltage is way down. It should be around 100 volts. We're at 87. We're bringing in 7 amps at 100 volts or so. And then at our battery, we're looking at 13.7, 13.8 volts. But we're bringing in 68 amps, 70 amps. And that's pretty good, bringing in 70 amps. When we get 5 more solar panels, we'll be at least 100 amps. And nice thing about this Victron, it shows you your history. Of course, that was the day I was running for 7 hours. I used a lot of sun rays. And that's the nice thing about solar. You don't have an electric bill at the end of the month. And the sun is free and you get to use it. The parts are expensive, but over the long term, and I expect to get our money's worth. I mentioned that it costs roughly $15,000. But when you consider if you have a stay at RV parks, which I don't want to stay there. I want to stay out in nature or at boondocking, Boondockers Welcome, or at Harvest Host and places like that. But if you were to stay at the RV parking lots, you might be paying $30 to $50 a night. Let's assume 50 a night. In 30 days in a month, that's $1,500 a month you're paying for RV parking. So 10 months is $15,000. So you'd have the whole system, your whole solar system paid off in 10 months of boondocking versus 10 months of staying in an RV parking lot. So I think it's a good investment. It being solar, it doesn't look any different on the outside or inside, but it makes a big difference when you're not hooked up to power. Thanks for watching.
If you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe. Like, comment, subscribe.